We are recapping week number 7 in the IHSA football season here on Friday Night Drive. Matt Rodewald, Steve Soucie with you here for another week as we dive into the chaos. And this week, it's easy to say we actually had chaos compared to what we've seen weeks 1 through 6. Souce, have you finished sorting it all out yet?
Yeah, it was a very interesting week in perspective of, there were a lot of games out there that I thought were going to do, something interesting potentially to shape the field. And we got some really, I'll call them rogue results. Some games that I was not expecting those things to happen. Ultimately, it didn't change a whole heck a lot about who got into the field. But what it did was change the stacks, the seed stacks. I mean, there were a lot of teams that went up, 5, 6, 7 seeds, and this late season, you don't move quickly that far up. But when you have one of them that goes the way you didn't expect it to, you got teams going way up, you got teams going significantly down, and once again, we saw another substantial chop at the undefeated teams in the state of Illinois. We're running out of them fast, and it looks like there's a potential to cut that list down even more this week with a lot of interesting Week 8 games.
Yeah, if you read through Sousie's column, of course, this morning earlier this week, I should say, from the Shaw Local, just in regards to what we learned, 35 unbeaten teams, down from 45. Okay, that sounds about right when you have matchups that are 6-0 and 6-0. You said it. We didn't have a single one that went that way, which means when you chop down that many unbeaten teams and all of a sudden you're sitting down at 35. But what I find fascinating, Souce, and we've talked about this on the show both on Monday and on Friday when we put this together, is that the unbeaten stacking of this across the state, unbeaten in 1A is a very different story than being unbeaten in 7A or 8A.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the list in general, and 450 enrollment and below is half of that list.
Man.
So think about that for a minute. So that's where we're at.
17 teams.
Yeah, so a dominating list of those, and then you flip it around, and like we were talking about, in 8A right now we've got 2 teams that could potentially finish the season undefeated. In 7A, it might be 1. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. That's where it becomes really interesting to look at this. Schools of 1,950 and above that are currently undefeated, there are a grand total of 4 of them. So
let's break this down real quick. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically 7 and 8A when you talk about that enrollment. So in those 2 classes, there are 4 teams right now that are undefeated, and each one of those teams over the course of the regular season has at least one game that maybe they could lose that game. Every one of them. All 4 of those teams. Maybe not Lincoln Way East, but the other 3 definitely have a game, at least one game remaining on their schedule that could be problematic for them.
Let's break this down from the bracket perspective, because obviously these things could even change even more so. And we saw Week 9 chaos a year ago. We're no stranger to that in Week 9 for sure. But when it comes down to it, when you have one unbeaten team in 7A, for example, where does the home game cut line end for, say, seeds 16 and 17 for the first round, like in terms of record, just as an example, just kind of for someone to tangibly say, yeah, 7-2, you're definitely getting a home game, or maybe a couple of 6-3s can get in there and get that home game, just for example.
Well, the weird thing about 7A in particular is while the 9-0s are kind of bleak, the potential 8-1 list is large. Mm-hmm. So if you are a 7-2 team hoping for a home game, you better have a heck of a lot of playoff points, because if you don't, it's not going to happen, because while there's very few 9-0s, that 8-1 list is much larger than usual. So if you're a 7-2 hoping for a home game, you better have a treasure trove of playoff points, because otherwise it's not going to happen for you. Now, in 8A,
for example, I would say go ahead.
yeah, that particular picture changes because the 8-1 group looks to be significantly smaller. The 7-win group might be tiny. We might be talking about 2 or 3 teams in total. So then the door is wide open for a 6-3 team to get a home game in 8A. In fact, it looks kind of likely at this point in time. So it just kind of depends on the construct of the class. 7A is strange in the sense that while we don't have any 9-0s, big 8-1 group. That is not the case in an 8A and many of the other classes. So, the 8-win group is also small in some of those situations as well. I mean, you start going down to 6A and 5A. Also, the window of opportunity is open for 6-win teams to get home games. Go all the way down to the bottom, however, you might be on the fence as an 8-1 team getting a home game in the first round. Right. That sounds crazy, but that's a possibility if you're an 8-1 team with low points and say, for example, 1A or especially 2A North, the possibility that you could be an 8-1 team and be on the road in the first round definitely exists.
So that is some of the chaos that we'll be watching over the course of the next 2 weeks when we come on the air on Friday night for Week 8 and next week. I can't believe we're already ready to say next week is Week 9. We're looking forward to that for sure. But in terms of the seeding, we've talked about that a little bit. Let's break down some of the conference craziness. Nothing more weird than the 2 conferences that come to mind, the Southwest Prairie and the Duquesne. I will throw you the coin to flip where you want to go first.
You know, you look at the Duquesne just in general. I mean, we talk about this all the time, you know, how deep the conference is, how we look at it on paper and say, okay, you know, these are the teams that we expect to get through. We don't necessarily can effectively attach a record to that process because I feel like you're looking at a lot of those teams at the beginning of the year going, okay, those are probably going to be the top 2 or 3 teams in the conference. But if they don't get through that non-conference schedule, the odds of them getting through the regular season schedule in their regular conference play unscathed is pretty slim. And we saw that a little bit last week because now you're looking at a conference right now where you've got, you know, a 6-1 in St. Charles North that surprisingly picked up their first loss a little bit last week. And then that group of teams at 5-2. And if you would have told me at the beginning of the season that Glenbard North would be one of those teams at 5-2, I would not have expected that. I don't mean to decry what they're doing. I'm just saying it wasn't on my bingo card. I'll put it that way. So, you know, so they're one of those teams at 5-2. And then you look down into the second tier of that in the overall records. You got Geneva sitting there at 3-4. That certainly wasn't the expectation for a state finalist from a year ago. No, they lost a lot, but to be in this situation now where they have to win out to get to 5 wins, and their point situation is okay, but it's not good enough for them to be in consideration as a potential 4 and 5. So, and then you got a team like Lake Park sitting there also at 3-4. Tough schedule down the stretch, but the way this league is, heck, you can't dismiss anybody.
Yeah, and if you're a Geneva team, you got to run the table at this point. With a tricky Wheaton North remaining on the schedule, that's this week, St. Charles East the week after that, so they really needed to have it. But let's go back to Glenbard North, because we haven't talked about them for 6 weeks on this show. We had a couple of people kind of chime in, and so we didn't know what to expect. And what do you make of them now when you examine what they've been doing in terms of what they can do and who they could be a matchup for should they get to Week 10, which at this point, they're in.
They're in at this point. I think there were a few, kind of subtle warning signals that maybe they might be a little bit better coming out of the non-conference season. I know Bartlett isn't the best program, but they beat them handily. And then they beat Bennett comfortably in week 2. And I think that might have said, hey, well, wait a minute, maybe there's a little bit of momentum coming here. And as the season went along, they were beating the teams that they if they're a serious playoff contender, they should beat. They beat St. Charles East early in the year. Mm-hmm. They also beat Roosevelt and Lake Park pretty easily in that. They hung with Wheaton Warrenville South. They hung in there. And then obviously the Geneva game last week. So that's a game that on paper you'd be a little bit surprised, that in week 7 that Glenbard North would win that game. But I guess there were some indicators along the way that this was a possibility.
Let's go back to St. Charles North for a minute, because Owen York putting up 285 yards on the ground and on 40 carries and 5 touchdowns. I watched St. Charles North against Geneva, and Geneva was able to run the ball and control the tempo a little bit too. So in terms of a very small sample size, I would say St. Charles North has a very tricky problem figuring out how to stop the run. And that's the one thing you can't have in November. You've got to be able to stop the run and get off the field in order to get that defense a bit of a rest. That's a problem for 7A when you get into the 7A postseason, for sure.
You know, they have been in a lot of close football games. And you know, this one wasn't close in week 7, but prior to this game in week 7, they'd figured out a way to win all of those close games, and some of them in almost ridiculous fashion. You go all the way back to week 1 when they clipped Manuka in the game on that 2-point conversion run.
Still thinking about that lead block on it.
You look back, you know, Geneva, a 10-7 win early in the season in that game. Mm-hmm. Batavia,
wild comeback.
I don't know what you described there, but they kept figuring out ways to overcome whatever those deficiencies were and stacking victories. And then, you know, they had to scrap pretty hard to beat St. Charles East the week previous. So,
right.
While that record looked nice, clean and nice at 6-0, there have been some hazards along the way that the North Stars have been able to figure out a way to get by. I'm not saying I expected this, because the margin definitely threw me. But, you know, in a roundabout way, maybe you know, the chips didn't fall their way. I mean, it was almost like they were due for something like this, because it seemed like every time they break in those previous 6 weeks, they found a way to get it.
They'll be fine once they get to the postseason, at least for a round. But it'll be interesting to see how deep they can advance, because every team has flaws, you know, and you're still trying to figure things out. But in terms of flaws, I think there's a lot of flaws in the Southwest Prairie. I don't know about the West Division, but can everyone get into the postseason? Because they're all trying to figure out a way to pull each other in the postseason.
Yeah, it's when you have teams that are like, you're going into that weekly schedule and you're like, I'm not sure who's going to win this game. And then you look at it after the week and you're like, I was wrong about all 3 of those games. And, you know, but they're all close. They're all in the battle. And, like, I was looking back to not necessarily a game this week, but a week prior when Manuka scored late in the game to beat Plainfield North. That, I think, might ultimately be the outcome that keeps that conference from getting all 6 of their teams into the postseason. Because if Plainfield North would have figured out a way to win that game, and they would be sitting at 3-4 right now, especially with their point situation, they have a ton of playoff points. I believe every team they've played this year currently has a winning record. So that's pretty bizarre. You don't see that happening very often. But yeah,
go ahead.
It's definitely a depth situation in that conference right now. And I'm not honestly that sure that any one of them is all that much better than anyone else. So one of those, on any given night, I think any one of those 5 teams that are at the top of that conference can beat the other ones. It just matters, you know, right now it feels like it's a carnival wheel. Let's spin the wheel and find out what we get tonight, because consistency out of what you're getting from those programs on a week-to-week basis doesn't really exist. I mean, you have some hallmarks that you kind of expect, but even some of those have been broken from the norm at times.
Yeah.
So almost any night of the week, I feel like you get Oswego East, Bolingbrook, Manuka, and Yorkville. You just kind of flip the coin and see what happens, because I think the margins and differences between those teams are so slim right now.
I think it's a mixture too of where those positives lie. Oswego's got a great defense. We know Yorkville's got an elite defense as well. But then you got the explosiveness of Oswego East and Bolingbrook. Manuka can score points, but their defense has gotten a lot better. So it's just sort of a balance on the kind of clashing styles that you see each and every week out of that conference, and you just never really know where it's going to go so far. We need to take a timeout, but when we come back, we're actually going to talk about the CPS for a brief moment here, and also R&B love. No, not R&B music. R&B. We're going to live both of them We're going to give some flowers, as we often do here on the show. We're recapping week number 7 here on Friday Night Drive with Steve Soucie, Matt Rodewald, right here at Shaw Local.
SGKR Injury Attorneys tackles the toughest cases. I'm Matt Rundio. When life throws a flag, we go on offense to protect your rights. Don't get sidelined. Score a touchdown with SGKR. Visit us at sgkr.law.
At Oliver's, we are proud to serve our community. We serve up great customer service, quality products, ease of shopping, and we serve up delicious barbecued sandwiches at our fundraiser cookouts. So stop by Oliver's, 748 North Brenton and Dixon, and help fund our local clubs and events.
In Illinois and into Iowa, the story of Shaw Media is a story of trust. Since 1851, we've been informing, connecting, and reflecting the communities we serve, large and small, rural and urban, suburban, and river towns alike, with dozens of local newspapers, radio stations, magazines, and specialty brands like Friday Night Drive and Starve Rock Country. We meet people wherever they are. We shine a light on local government. We celebrate Friday night touchdowns. We tell the stories that shape your day, from neighborhood heroes to the Chicago Bears. But what truly sets us apart? It's our people. The award-winning journalists, broadcasters, and storytellers who live here, work here, and care deeply about what matters most to you. We don't just report the news. We're part of the fabric of the places we serve, from the Mississippi to the Illinois, from the Fox all the way to the chain of lakes. Trusted for generations, still earning it every day. Shaw Media, your most trusted local source.
And welcome back as we continue on the show, recapping week number 7 here of the 2025 IHSA season here on Friday Night Drive. I'm Matt Rodewald, he's Steve Soucie, and of course, we're taking your comments as well. I like Zaddy's comment, because let's bring this up right away and go right to it. Not so much about if they can beat Mount Carmel. I'm more curious if you think they're a state contender in 6A. I think 6A is one of those classes that's as wide open as it gets. You and I like Glenwood. We also know that East St. Louis is East St. Louis, but can they get there? It's all about who can get where and when in terms of the bracket. What do you think Fenwick's road's going to be like?
Well, the most interesting thing right now when you talk about 6A is there's a very prominent team right now that is sitting right on the geographic bubble between the north and south brackets. That team is Nazareth. So currently, right now, Nazareth is slotting into the south bracket by a razor-thin edge. And it kind of depends on how you look at the map, on how you interpret it. It looks like to me that they are slightly more south than another team in that bracket. If they are placed in that south bracket, I think the north bracket opens up rather nicely if you take Nazareth out of that opponent for somebody that maybe you're not necessarily thinking about, because I think a lot of the real firepower of that bracket is in the south bracket, especially if Nazareth ends up there. So, I mean, I think that would be a bracket that if Nazareth is gone, Fenwick would be one of those teams that I'd put on a very short list of possibly coming out of that north bracket.
We'll get back to the classes, so to speak, in just a second. I do want to talk CPS. Also, we'll get to R&B Love. And also, we saw Owen Lancu for the first time in a couple of weeks. We'll break down that performance as well. But let's start with the city, because you mentioned this in your column this week, that we're not going to see, and this is just the very basics of this, we're not going to see that week 9-0 team that gets to the postseason and say 4A, 5A, and it's immediately bounced. Does that sound about right to you, based on what you've seen so far?
Well, we're not going to see them on a number 1 or a number 2 seed line.
There you go.
That's simply not going to happen. Like I said, the last 2 undefeated teams in the Chicago Public League took their first loss this weekend. There is a relatively large group of Chicago Public League teams that currently have 1 loss and may finish 8-1, but in that situation, most Chicago Public League schools don't have a cachet of playoff points, so the odds of them being highly seeded among the 8-win group is not real good. So I think the best situation for some of those schools in the 16 seeded classes would be maybe a 4 or 5 seed. In the larger classes, 7 and 8A, maybe an 8 or a 9 seed, which, as I've talked about ad nauseum, outside of a few public league programs, the expectation is that they would be a pretty substantial underdog in almost any matchup in the postseason. And it's been something that has bothered a lot of people when you look at that bracket and you see, a 7 or an 8A bracket, for example, where a public league team is seated second, and the 31 seed, the 5 and 4 team beats them 42-0 and moves on, into the second round. So that may still happen, but it won't happen from the 1, 2, or 3 seed line this year, because all of those programs have at least one loss at this point. In fairness, I will say, you draw a Kenwood in the playoffs.
I was just going to ask you.
That's not the same situation. We're not talking about the same thing anymore. I
No.
saw that team in week 1. I think they're very talented quarterback in Keontae Lewis. That's a really good public team. Morgan Park, another example of that. I mean, but for the most part, if you draw a public league team in the first round, you're feeling okay about your situation, because history proves year after year after year, the most of the public league teams are not capable of competing at the level that they need to beat a non-public league school in the playoffs. They got some wins last year. It was one of those weird things where they ended up playing each other in the first round. That's really the only time that they seem to get.
I hate that.
Yeah.
It's how it goes sometimes. That's just kind of the breaks of it all. Let's switch gears and talk about RB. Which RB would you like to talk about that's 7-0? Because they both are right now.
The one that is most interesting to me, and I was looking at it today, I was looking at the list of the remaining undefeated teams, and I was just trying to be honest with myself. Okay, if you had to go through this list and say, who's the one that you are most surprised by? And I went through it, and I was trying to do a little bit, saying, well, this is a little bit surprising. I can see how this was probably, I would have thought this was unlikely. And then I got to Riverside Brookfield. And I'm like, nope, didn't see that coming. I mean, the program has obviously, came down a little bit from their heyday when they were out there flinging it all over the field. And this was a while ago.
Oh, it's a long while ago.
Yeah, but they never really bottomed out, if you would. I mean, they were always kind of maybe
They sort of drifted away.
Yeah, their fringe maybe make it in with 5 wins or something. Maybe climb to 6, but they never got back to that relevance. But seeing them on this list right now, to me, they're the biggest surprise of those teams on that list. I think everyone else, you could have told me that, and my reaction would have been like, okay, I can see that. There are a few others that are minorly surprising. I mean, El Paso Gridley would not have been a team that I would have bet on being in that situation. Just based on who they play in the regular season, I would have thought that they would have at least got one loss. Bishop McNamara is another one. I mean, they haven't.
We talked about them a lot, yeah.
They've not been at that level, but Riverside Brookfield would be that team for me.
I think for a lot of folks, I don't think they understand the juggernaut that was RB in that era. And, this is a bunch of old heads talking right now.
Yes.
Of the late 90s, 2000, early 2000s. And, I think Josh Welge unearthed it. It's the first time they've been 7-0 since 2001. So it's been that long. But in that era, I got to play against that team. And they would throw 5 wide receivers when there was no such thing as throwing out 5 wide receivers. Everyone's running wing tees or options or pro-style offenses. Let's think about that. I want all the 20-something coaches, 30-something coaches that are listening and watching this program to think they're throwing 5 wide receivers in the late 90s. Otto Zeman was way ahead of his time when it came to doing those sorts of things. And I was a safety and at Geneva, and having to go play against that team, I started my final game at RB as an outside linebacker. I was no business being, but it's because we went to nickel and just basically went nickel the whole time and no one had done that. And so that's why we're kind of amused by it. There's a little special place in, I think, every reporter's heart for RB because of, one, where it is, because it's next door to the zoo in Brookfield. But it's just the idea that they were kind of the first of what we see everywhere now of looking over to the sideline, looking at the wristband, and then calling the play. No one else had done that up until that point. So, and then we're not trying to dismiss them, but everyone else caught up, and it just kind of drifted away a little bit. And where they are in that school, and I would say the Elmwood Parks and the Fentons, and where they've all been in that nomad of conference moving we've seen for 35, dare I say 40 years, really? Because, having gone through the Suburban Prairie Little Seven mess and merger, I experienced that myself. But they never stopped moving. Like, they've always been like, well, what conference are we in now? Do we want to do the Metro for a while? Okay, well, you want to do it Upstate 8 now? Now they've settled down, and I think there's some stability now.
They spent a year in the Southland.
Say that again?
They spent a year in the Southland. They spent a year in the Southland Conference. I mean, that if you know the geography, that doesn't fit at all. That just kind of shows you how crazy their journey has been. Like I would have to look it up to be sure. I'm willing to bet they've been in 5-6 different conferences over the last 20 years.
Well, the Suburban Prairie East, and then the Metro, and then I think they tried to do the Chicago. I don't know whatever conference that Ridgewood was in for a little while, and they're another team that's been that nomad where I don't know who we're playing. Right. And the problem with those schools, and I feel terrible about this, but this is where you get rivalries that erode, you get morale that erodes, and it fades away, and all of a sudden participation and in some of the sports, not just football but all sports, kind of goes by the wayside. RB has been able to keep it together, so good for them in terms of their unique size and their ability to compete. So it's great to see them at 7-0. It's awesome. Now, can they do anything in the postseason? Certainly, time will tell. It'll be fascinating, but that is something that's going to be interesting to see. I want to switch to the other RB. Richmond Burton is 7-0, and yeah, they're always good and competing, and it's always been something that wouldn't be too much of a surprise. But I kind of thought of this today when I was getting ready for this show, and Mike Knoll's been doing this a long time, and he's not just been doing it there, but he had some really, really good programs at McHenry. Unfortunately, it turned into 9-0, 9-1. And he went to Glenbrook South and had some success there as well, where, trying to get them to the elite level has been something a bit of a challenge. He's on the doorstep of 300 wins, and he might be one of the best football coaches in Illinois right now after 30 years of doing it for as long as he's been doing it. Yeah,
there's no doubt about that. It's just a program that, like you said, I've kind of watched that progression through multiple different programs, and it's always been admirable what Richmond Burton's been able to do. It's one of those schools that the enrollment has kind of declined in kind of a consistent pattern over time, because for years Richmond Burton would be locked into 4A. This was just where you expected them to be. And then a few years ago I started to notice that number was starting to drop, and now they are it's not even a debate. They're going to be a 3A team in the postseason this year. And I think they're going to stay there for a while with current trends. So basically, he keeps evolving that program and adapting to whatever weapons and personnel he has at his disposal.
Yeah.
And that's a good credit to him, because it's like he's come from bigger programs where he's had more things to utilize. Now he's in a bit of a smaller program, has adapted to what makes that work. They tend to have a lot of kids playing both sides of the football, but not all the time. Gets kids
just enough,
maybe a limited role where they're contributing as much as they can give, and figures out a way to slot that in. That's something that I've always kind of admired about what they do when I've seen them, is that, I'm like, wait a minute, that kid just ran the ball 5 times in a row, goes in for a couple plays at linebacker, spells a kid, gives them enough juice to get through a drive. I mean, it's a finesse move, and it's something that I really admired about what he does in that program. And it always seems like we're talking about them in some sort of construct, maybe not running the table and going undefeated, but always putting together a good season. 7-8 wins. It's like you can almost lock that in.
Yeah, and when you see him in the postseason across the way on the bracket, you're like, this is going to be a game. And not only because of the talent in the field, but if you have to go up there to play them, that's not easy to do, because that is a football crazy community. They love it up there. And obviously when they come to wherever you are, they're going to travel really, really well in the postseason. They always seem to do that in November. Just something that I've certainly noticed with the Rocket community over the years. I want to make sure that you mentioned 4A, so let's talk about in 4A before we switch over to Owen Lancu. I have on my list, I have Richland County I have Benton, and I have Carterville. What do you know about those 3 7-0 teams, if anything at all, about what they could do in the postseason, potentially making as far as you can?
Well, first of all, Benton is probably a 3A school. So that's one thing. We're talking about 4. We're probably a 3. So I really can't.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I really can't tell you all that much about either one of those remaining schools. I know a little bit about Carterville. I think this is a pretty solid football team. The one thing that I will say about Carterville is I don't know how good they are because they honestly have not played that very good of a schedule this year.
Okay.
If you really kind of look back at their levels, it has not been very strong. They played a non-conference game against a team from Kentucky that is not very good. So they have not had a lot of games where you can say, okay, this is a flag planting game. Their division is not as strong as the other side. So they haven't had a lot of those games where they've had to say, okay, this is a team that will prove our worth. I still think they're pretty good, but they have not had a lot of competition brought their way.
I would say my homework for. Go ahead. Yeah.
Go ahead. Richland County is a little bit of an interesting story. I mean, 2 years ago they were 0-9. They've obviously turned some things around there. They were pretty good last year too. The interesting thing about them, it's another one of those situations from a scheduling perspective. I'm not sure about it because they're kind of the big dog enrollment-wise in their conference. There's a lot of 1s and 2A schools in their conference. They've done the job. They've done what they've needed to do, but they're kind of a big fish in a small pond in their conference. So they have an upcoming game with Casey Westfield that I think will kind of be a proving ground game. I'm not sure if that's next, but I think they're kind of in the same boat as Carterville in the sense of they've done what they've needed to do. They've beat who's been put in front of them, but as far as real flag planting victories, I don't know if they have one either.
Yeah, Casey Westfield 7-0 in 1A or 2A. I forget off the top of my head, but either way, Richland County is on my list of homework to learn more about them going forward. I can tell you that Carterville has like the Cincinnati Bearcats thing in terms of their logo, and it's pretty sharp. It's really, really sharp. So that's the only thing I know. I mean, I like starting to look at this stuff this time of year. I'm not trying to put either one of us on the spot, but there is this point where in the season where we kind of go, I don't know how good they are, but they're 7-0. We better start looking to see if they are any good for sure, especially when we get to see them in the postseason. We got to see Owen Lancu for the first time in a while, coming back from that broken left arm, and 388 yards, 4 touchdowns. Looks like he's right back to form and really going to throw quite the wrench into the 7A draw here, having a couple of weeks to get ready to go.
Yeah, it was one of those things where trying to figure out when he was coming back. They were kind of keeping that under wraps. We didn't know for sure when he was coming back. And as doing what I do with the projections, I had downgraded Downers Grove North considerably, primarily because I didn't know if he was going to be back for these games. If I would have had a target date, said, hey, when he's going to be back, might have changed my thought process about that. And I'll admit when I'm wrong. I think they were the team that I made the most dramatic change to this based on results. After hearing and getting a report on how good he looked in particular in that win on Friday night, I was like, well, wait a minute. I think we're okay now. I think that's fine. And I catapulted them up. I think they went up 12 or 15 seeds this week. So that's how valuable. Yeah, it's a ton. It's an absolute ton. Like I said, I don't remember the last time I moved a team that much because of one thing inside of 1 week. So but that's what happened. So because I thought they had a challenging schedule down the back half of the schedule, and without him, I wasn't sure that they would win those games. So with him, I think they have a very good chance to win those games. And as long as they stay healthy and on the field, I think they're a very dangerous team.
Downers Grove North beat York, who's been surprisingly quiet in terms of attention around the state, even though they got to the state finals last year in Class 8A. The Owen Lancu news surprised us, but so did Johnny O'Brien not playing, if memory serves me correctly, in terms of what he's meant to Fremd. And if he's out for a long stretch, and I don't know why he was out or anything like that, you knew more than I did when we talked about this after Friday for sure.
Yeah, I was surprised to hear it. I didn't realize that there was anything going on there. But I mean, obviously a huge difference maker for that program. Him not playing would have changed my perspective of that game going into it. Barrington, a very good team anyway. I don't know if it would have, I mean, I think it would have been obviously a more competitive game than it was with O'Brien playing. I still think Barrington may have been able to still win that game with him in the game, but he wasn't there. Obviously changed the landscape of what was going on there. I'm not really sure what that means moving forward for him, like in regards to, if and when he's coming back for them. But if he's not back, that changes the landscape for them pretty significantly as well.
We got a commenter. It's Michelle asking. We're going to flip back to 7A because I want to know what you think of this with Lincoln Way West. Only because of what Michelle says, a weak schedule. 7A, we saw Brother Rice, and we know they're very good. We just talked about Downers Grove North. We've talked about a St. Charles North team that's been on the border in terms of their competitiveness. I don't think they can make a run to a state championship, but they could make some hay, so to speak, in 6A versus 7A. Where do you think Lincoln Way West falls in line with all this?
It's interesting, what she kind of says there about the schedule. They've played some pretty decent teams. I mean, they started the season they blew out an Eisenhower team that's going to the playoffs. They beat a Lockport team that's likely going to the playoffs. They beat an Andrew team that's likely going to the playoffs. They beat a Lincoln Way Central team that is pretty darn good. I mean, they're 6-1 right now. They didn't blow these teams out per se. Some of them were very close football games, but this is the kind of team that I think with a good defense, and if they get a good draw, they could potentially go pretty far because it's a good defense with a good running game. It's the kind of things that you need to have to be successful in November. Now, the weather notwithstanding so far this season, that's the kind of blueprint that I think can play very, very well in November if they get a good draw. But it's hard to tell. I mean, I think we're going to learn a lot more about Lincoln Way West this week when we see how that game with Bradley Bourbonnais goes. That is an interesting concept that we have to look at in Week 8 because Bradley's got a high-octane offense, Lincoln Way West with a very good defense. Who comes out of that? How does Lincoln Way West weather that game? Do they win it? What if they don't? I mean, it changes a lot of things for them. If they run the table and finish the regular season 9-0, there's the potential there for them to have a very, very nice draw. If they don't, then the whole thing could change around for them. So I think we're going to learn a ton about Lincoln Way West in Week 8.
Two teams that could also have a very interesting draw for someone else, Providence and Loyola. And Providence getting that win over Loyola changed a lot of viewpoints on Providence for sure. Strengthen yours, I would say. You've talked about Providence the last couple of weeks here. And it was the first time that Providence had beaten a Rambler since 2009, which I read earlier today. I didn't realize it was that long. It felt long, but I didn't know it was that long for sure. What are these two teams, when you look at the projections as to where they could fall at this point? Loyola's kind of tricky because they only have 8 games on their schedule. And so that's something that's going to, and really plays a factor when you lose for sure. Not so much when you win, but I would say more so when you lose here. Where do you look at where they're going to go?
Well, the scariest thing for Loyola is they've got 2 challenging games in the back end of their season. They play Carmel this week, which I think Loyola is your favorite here, but you kind of got to look at it from a realistic perspective. Providence and Carmel played earlier this year, and it was an absolute dogfight. Providence just beat Loyola. So I don't think you can dismiss Carmel as a potential threat to beating Loyola there. And then they've got Mount Carmel in Week 9. So it's not out of the possibility that Loyola could potentially lose both of those games. And if they do, you know what happens? They're 4-4. And since they don't have a week two game on the books, they also have less playoff points. So ordinary argument would be, okay, we're going to need some 4-win teams. Loyola's got to have a bunch of playoff points. They're going to
be in the back of the list.
not so fast, because while they do have a lot of playoff points, especially for somebody who played 8 games, they don't have enough. So the fact that they don't have that week 2 game, and that's basically a big old 0, it's essentially the same. I mean, the same equivalent of if you played a winless team, but
Right.
and got them beat. But for their purposes, they need to get that 5th win. So let's just say they beat Carmel and they get there, and then they lose to Mount Carmel in week 9. They finish 5-3. They're technically, for playoff seeding purposes, 5-4. Then they fall in that 5-4 group, and they're not going to be at the top of the list of 5-4 teams playoff points wise. So you're looking at a 27, a 28, if they were to lose to Mount Carmel in week 9 and beat Carmel. So they're way down that list in terms of seeding, because even with a couple of 4 and 5 teams pushing those 5 and 4 teams up, they're still going to be fairly low seeded. I would say a high 20s seed would be in their future if they split their remaining 2 games and get to 5 wins. So that's the situation. Yeah. And it becomes really,
when you look at it at the 5A, 6A level, and where Providence falls either way at the very least, the fact that they keep rising, and you can read, all you have to do is read some articles, and you can read between the lines and where the confidence is down there in New Lenox. That is something we have not seen in a while, talking about 7 wins versus 5 wins, and it's the change is notable for sure. So if anyone sees them in November, it is not going to be a pleasant thing for them. I want to switch over to the Fox Valley before we run out of time, because Luke Vanderwild and Prairie Ridge, they keep doing Prairie Ridge things. And Luke Vanderwild's got 1,200 yards rushing so far, 21 rushing touchdowns. PR is awfully good. Prairie Ridge, we know they're going to contend in 5A. How good can this team go? And having seen them in person, yeah, they have a nice defense, but they take advantage of turnovers, and it's up to Vanderwild. If he's doing it, then they're fine, but who else is going to help them? That's the one thing about this offense. When you've seen with Prairie Ridge and Cary Grove, you need 2 or 3 guys to be threats, and I haven't seen that second and third yet.
I think amongst all the classifications across the board, the class that I'm most confused about in regards to saying who I think could potentially be in normal is 5A. I think it is the classification that is the most wide open. I think it has the largest list of teams that I think I would put at least some percentage on their potentially getting to the state final. But in all indications in my mind, I think the team that you would have to put at the top of that list is Prairie Ridge. I believe that. I think, just on the situation that they're in, what they do it so well. They seem to have the pieces that they need to make that engine move the way they want it to move. I think I'm not going to say I think it's probable that Prairie Ridge is in the state championship game, but I think if I had to label a favorite for getting there, that's what I would do.
And I'm curious as to see how brackets fall, because of Cary Grove continuing to play very well. And when would they see them in the North? Would that be early? Would it be late? I just don't know. And, Cary Grove's got Hampshire next week. What's interesting real quick? Hampshire's 3-4. They have to do a lot to get to the postseason, but the fact that they're in week 8 talking playoffs is a good thing for the Whip country.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Can I circle back 1 second on Prairie Ridge for a second? The fact that Prairie Ridge is in a locked conference leads to a very intriguing thing when it comes to seeding, because there's another team in another locked conference in 5A that seems to be heading to 9-0 as well, and that's Belvedere North. So the tiebreaker for seeding purposes is points. If you're in a locked conference and you finish 9-0, you can only finish with 36 points. There's no way around it. You can't gain more, you can't gain less. That's what happens. So there's no way to break the tie between those 2 teams other than a random number generator. So if both of those 2 teams run the table, go 9-0, are both placed in the North bracket, which is what will happen, there's literally no way to predict who will be the 1 or the 2 seed. It won't matter that much in the grand scheme of things, but, there could be a situation where you look at it's not quite as bad as a few years ago when the 15 seed was Nazareth.
Right.
Because we're not going to see something like that. But deciding I really wish that they'd come up with a better way to break that tie for the top seed than random number generators, because that's what's going to happen here. It looks like both Prairie and Belvedere North are going to run the table. Both come from lot conferences. There's no way to break that tie on playoff points. They're both going to finish with 36. So yeah, that's just a little interesting factoid about potentially what could happen in 5A North.
I think I have an idea, and maybe you'll endorse this. I would say if we can, and maybe the folks of the IHSA, I know they watch our show, but if we could get the designated line coach for each school to do a 2-man sack race, both of them, and do that for 30 yards at a neutral site. And then we have it on NFHS Network, so then everybody could pay for it and watch it too, because it's high quality content, and we could just figure out a way to break the tie that way, because there's got to be, I don't know who the line coach is, and by the way, the rule is shorts, no pants, you got to wear shorts. What's the weather? Doesn't matter, shorts. That's how it's going to work. I think that's how you break the tie. It's just
I have another question for you.
Go ahead.
I've got another question for you. Okay, this is another tie scenario that I think is very interesting. How should we solve this one? Okay, there are 2 schools right now with exactly the same enrollment that are between 3 and 4A. One's going to go to 3. If it stays that way, one will go to 3A, one will go to 4A. How is that decided? That is decided now by a coin flip. How should we decide it, Matt Rodewald?
Well, we have ISB report cards. Data is coming out in a matter of 3 weeks. New enrollment data. We could use the refreshed enrollment data. You could do that. You could also ask each school to submit the most recent enrollment report. You can do that. It's also a matter of public record. So if the IHSA could simply FOIA the results in an emergency status, just to have it on them. Yes, there's ways around that, but I don't know if they'll do any of that stuff. But that's me putting my journalism hat on and how that would work. Please don't FOIA me for anything. Please, I just promise you that. Last thing,
I was going to get the watermelon eating contest, but that's just me.
Look, all these things we can add to the open house scheduling agenda that we will have in the spring and March. Bring your notebooks, bring your contracts, and have your AD on text ready to go, and then we'll be able to schedule your games for week 9 when you can't find people in Illinois. Last thing for me, because I'm selfish, the Central Rockets held the Huntley Red Raiders to 7 points. That defense is scary good right now, and I'm not sure what to make of it, and folks in Burlington don't either.
Yep, absolutely, and it's been a really fine season for them. Once again, positioning themselves to be in really good position to have a nice seed, maybe as high as 2 in that North bracket at this point in time. Probably behind, but there would be a way that could change too. So
sure,
maybe even they could still get to the 1. It's a possibility.
What games are you looking at to potentially attend this weekend, kind sir? I have no idea. I haven't even looked at the schedule yet off the top of my head.
I haven't really looked at it that comprehensively either. The most interesting games that are at least relatively close to me, involving teams around my general area, are unfortunately a little bit outside of the window that makes me comfortable in getting back to this broadcast on time for Friday night.
That's an issue for us.
Yeah, so I was really hoping that the Bradley Bourbonnais Lincoln Way West game would be down here. It's not. It's at New Lenox, so I'm not sure I can pull that off. So I haven't made a decision on that yet in regards to what I'm going to do on Friday night. So I'm hopeful that I can figure out somewhere to be, but if not, I will stay here and try to monitor 12 games at once like I usually do.
You may recall on the television broadcasts we used to do, good old Comcast Sportsnet, where we would do the playoff games. The one thing I would always pitch was trying to get a statewide telecast on the quarterfinal round at a small school, just to show the insane atmosphere. But people want to see the big schools, and it's hard to sell, and it's a TV kind of grindy, it's kind of a weird thing. This might feel like the week where I should go to a small school to see what it's like.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be my assignment, to potentially look and see if there's any small school matchups that are maybe I'll go see that one. But I'm on the fringes of it. You and I kind of have a same geographical, we can get to big schools and small schools in our area, but it's also, can we get back to the ranch in time to do the show? So we'll keep an eye out for it. You do the same, and we will see you on Friday at 9:30, sir.
Sounds great.